Hello and welcome to In Focus. I'm Peter Laffin, editor of the Washington Examiner's In Focus section. Our guest today is senior writer David Harsanyi. David, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
So no one who's been paying attention to Tucker Carlson for the past few years was all that surprised that he had Nick Fuentes onto his show. But I was taken aback by Kevin Roberts' decision to come out and sort of bless that union, not just because it was morally problematic, but it was just so politically dumb. And he seems like a really savvy person. Was that your reaction?
Well, I agree with that. I don't understand why Kevin Roberts even felt the need. I mean, I actually probably do. He's friends with Tucker, so maybe there was some personal pressure there. That's just me guessing. But it seems odd for him to put the reputation of the Heritage Foundation on the line for someone like Tucker Carlson. At first, when I first saw that video he made, and it just happened to be on Twitter. Unfortunately, I happen to be on there a lot. Come across my feed right when he, sent it, and I watched it, and I was taken aback. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, because, well, we'll get into that, but it just hit me. Why would the head of the Heritage Foundation do something like this? I think that there is a fight between what I'd call paleocons and Reaganites, I guess, and he's on the paleocon side, and he feels the need to protect Tucker because Tucker has a huge audience, and it matters for that side, the paleo side, to win the hearts of, the Republican Party. I think they are winning it in a way, but I think maybe here they've just taken it a step too far, and there will be blowback for it. So.
Well, it seems he's already come out and apologized for it, and he's been trying to walk it back for a few days. So to me, I'm actually very heartened by this whole episode. To me, it signals that maybe the darker forces aren't taking over the party.
Hmm. I think that's a charitable view of what he did in a way. I watched his speech or parts of his speech at Heritage, and I looked at the other. I think he had a tweet out on Fuentes, which I'm glad. I'm glad he was very specific that Nazis are bad, and but he still is constantly saying that we shouldn't cancel Nick Fuentes, which is just a red herring in my view. Or I don't think. I know that the Heritage Foundation wouldn't have him as a guest there. Does that mean that they're canceling him, or does that mean that they have some kind of gatekeeping which keeps people who are, who say that women want to be raped or that Hitler is cool out of their conversation? This idea that I have to, or you have to, or anyone has to debate every nut who's out there just because they have an audience, I think is, it's just destructive. And so that still bothers me. I felt like his excuse was a bit like, you misunderstood the nuance. You misunderstood what I said, or I'm sorry that you misunderstood what I said, which someone pointed out. Many men, myself included, try to use with our wives, and it doesn't work out. So I'm not sure why it would work out with the large audience. I, and there's another part of this, is the whole entire. Listen, initially I thought that maybe he didn't understand what was really going on with Tucker, that someone else wrote that little speech for him, which seems to be maybe the case because I forget the person's name, his sort of second in command or whatever his title was let go. But then coming back, and I think this is a reactionary method that the new right sort of has taken on, where they can never admit, if liberals say something is wrong, then we can't admit it is. They just can't. You can't give an inch ever. And I think he's taken on a little bit of that in a way. I think it's problematic. I'm not saying, Kevin Roberts is a bad guy. I don't know him. Everyone tells me he's a good guy. I'm sure he is. But even good people have to live with the things they say and do. And his explanation, for me at least, has not been good enough. Not that I have any power to do anything about it.
I've known Kevin a bit, and I am one of the people who would say I'm pretty convinced he is a good guy. And I know he's a man of very deep faith. And up until last week, I'd never noticed anything like hate in his bearing, in his speech, in his positions. I thought he was a man of great principle, occasionally maybe playing with the fringes a little bit, in the sense that he is trying to keep these people in the circle, to win over some of the people who are going to the far right. So I was very surprised just by the tone tone deafness of it. You talk a bit in your most recent piece about gatekeeping. I wonder if you could unpack that a little bit more for us. I found that idea in your piece very interesting.
Well, I have this debate with people who I would consider populists or new right or whatever, where they get offended when you say there should be some gatekeeping. Like, I've been writing a long time, and I've probably written about cancel culture here and there, but I'm not as reflexively against it as everyone else. And that's not to say that the people who are being canceled quite often by the left over the years deserved it in any way. I think that a
Mhm.
lot of that was wrong. But that doesn't mean there isn't anyone on this earth who needs to be, uh, you know, stigmatized. Or there aren't ideas out there that should be stigmatized. It's almost as if the right is employing the moral relativism that the left used to when, to allow the most, to allow really gross or immoral things to be normalized, I guess, right?
Mhm.
So when I talk about gatekeeping, like I mentioned, Heritage gatekeeps, or they would have Nick Fuentes there in debate. Everyone gatekeeps. Every publication gatekeeps. They have people submit, all kinds of ideas and essays and articles, and they put up what they think is smart or not, whatever. They gatekeep. Um, the idea that we have to, first of all, in the intimate, he intimates quite
Mhm.
strongly that in the big picture, in the overarching picture, the people who like Nick Fuentes are on the same side as I am on, or that a
Right.
conservative is on, which to me is crazy. Um, if you need them to win, something is deeply wrong with the right, you know?
Mhm.
And so I think it's perfectly acceptable to say Tucker is wrong. Tucker Carlson is wrong. And I hate to use the word normalizing because everyone uses it, but to lift
Right.
up and try to moderate, which I think he did, the positions of Nick Fuentes, both to make himself look more moderate, but also to
Mhm.
bring this person aboard in some way, which is clearly what he's doing. I hate when we pretend
Clearly.
that we don't know what Tucker Carlson's up to.
Speaking of people calling each other friends, everybody was apparently JD Vance's friend last week. In Kevin Roberts' video, he said, my friend JD Vance, talking about quotes that he gave at the Turning Point USA conference. I read, Rod Dreher's column that came out right after the Heritage video, right after the Tucker flap. He's, appealing, saying, my friend JD Vance, you need to get in there. You need to rebuke this. Vance has been awkwardly silent throughout all of this. And he's as plugged into the online right wing stuff as anybody in the world. He's surely aware that all of this is happening. To me, it seems that there is a power vacuum that's been created through Vance's silence. And it's the first time where it looks like, okay, somebody might actually be able to outflank him on this. Somebody might be able to challenge him if he doesn't come out and give some statement, help Republican voters to see that these people aren't with us. What's your take on how all of this is shaping the 2028 GOP primary?
Hmm. I don't know. I do know I'm surprised that I'm going to say this sentence, but Trump is actually a moderating force in the Republican Party right now. JD Vance is kind of the manifestation of this this movement, this intellectual movement that came with Trump, but I don't think really represents exactly what Trump's about because I don't think Trump's any kind of ideologue at all, other than
Right.
maybe on trade or something. JD Vance is. JD Vance pulled this thing before the election where Tucker had on. I might be having my dates might be slightly off, but he had on that fake historian, populist historian who's always blaming Churchill for World War
Daryl
II and so
Cooper.
yeah, and he appeared on Tucker's show after that had run. Now it had been pre-taped, but someone asked him like, "How do you feel about all of that?" And he went on with his own about free speech and canceling people and this and that, but wouldn't actually say anything. I believe, critical of the whole situation. I'll just say this: I'm very suspicious of J.D. Vance in general. I don't think he's any kind of conservative other than I think he's like, I mean, I call him a progressive who goes to church, essentially. I think he's a socially conservative person, but his economic ideas, I think he's an isolationist. And he gave an answer at one of these TPUSA events recently that was very disturbing to me, where one of these Fuentes type people stood up, went on with all of these anti Jewish conspiracies about how they were running the world and dragging the United States into a world war. And rather than say, those ideas that you're spreading are not true, he essentially said, don't worry, Donald Trump's never going to let them drag us into World
Right.
War III, Israel into World War III. Stuff like that is very concerning to me. I don't think he's a Nick Fuentes guy or anything like that. I doubt he's even really a Tucker Carlson guy, but he's definitely, you know, someone who leans in that hard paleo direction. And a lot of conservatives out there want that now. So, and I just want to say this as well. I think that they make a mistake in believing that whoever, let's say JD Vance, is next in line, that he's going to be as popular or be able to corral all the factions of conservatism in the same way as
Right.
Trump has. It's going to be a
Right.
lot harder for him. He's not as charismatic, even though they keep telling me he is. I just don't think that's true. And it's going to be much more difficult for him unless he really moderates and maybe, and all of that. But we'll see.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that he's had such an unbelievable polling lead, really since the inauguration, when people started asking, okay, who's next? That the expectations were set really, really high, and there's only one place to go from there. And an episode like this, I really do believe it gives an opening to somebody to challenge him. I think JD Vance is a master at the pivot from whatever the point is being raised to, and this is why the legacy media, nobody watches it anymore, and this is why Donald Trump's awesome. But I don't see that as a magic bullet in this fight the way that it's been for him since he was named the vice president. And like you say, he's, not going to be able to carry both of these factions in the conservative movement like Donald Trump did, because you can see there's resistance to him already that's really strong and seems dug in. I started seeing Marco Rubio images being shared around the internet immediately. Now, some people on the right, some people we work with would say, well, they don't understand who Marco Rubio is today. This isn't the Marco Rubio of 2016. But if Marco Rubio decided, hey, maybe I don't want to be vice president, it seems like he could secure himself a lot of loyalty in the conservative movement right now by stepping into this. I haven't seen a real division like this in the conservative movement since Trump consolidated power, and so it seems like there's a real opportunity there.
I hope you're right. Actually, if you listen to Vance, he's always going on, or he has gone on many times about how during the past 40 years, things have gone south. Right? That's a big it's a big talking point for people who I will call paleos, how Reagan conservatism had kind of destroyed the party, destroyed the country. It's always 40 years. It's not Carter. It's always Reagan. That's the problem. I think there's still a lot of people in this country who believe in Reagan conservatism. I'm not saying that they adulate or worship Ronald Reagan or anything anymore, but they do have those same basic beliefs. I think they're much more open to his ideas than they are to the hard, pale, angry, in my view, paleo ideas that people like on the paleo right, are spreading, like anti-immigrant. I hate. I sound sometimes, for years and years, the left would say, "Oh, there were a bunch of fascists on the right, a bunch of anti." And it wasn't true, but now it is true to some extent. There are those factions that are more popular than they used to be, and we have to deal with that. As far as Rubio, I think you're right. I think the people who say that he's not the same guy as 2016 are right. I mean, his economics are actually quite close, probably, to Vance's. I mean, he's made that turn as well, which is popular on the right. I've kind of given up on the free market stuff. I just don't think it's has any traction with most voters today. I think most voters are wrong. I think they don't understand what's actually gone on over the last 30 years and the kind of miracle economic growth we've had and the kind of unprecedented, wealth that we have. But I still think that he speaks the language of the boomer conservative, kind of, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like I think he is a kind of candidate that maybe both sides could coalesce around. And so I think he has a shot at it. But in the end, doesn't it just come down to what Donald Trump decides is the guy who's going to carry the mantle?
I would have thought of that. I would have thought that a couple weeks ago. But Trump, when it comes to these intra-party conflicts, he seems to have really receded. I don't know that he has that kind of pull anymore now that his sort of electoral career is over. But I would have thought that a couple weeks ago. But this has, been such a gigantic news story in the conservative movement, and Trump hasn't had anything to do with it. And that aspect of this has kind of shocked me too. That maybe it's not just going to be whoever he anoints or, even direct the party forward. I have been saying for a long time, I agree with you completely that I think Trump is a moderating force, not because he's an ideologue in the other direction, but because he doesn't really have thoughts like that. He doesn't really have those solid beliefs. I think when people call him transactional, they're right, but I don't necessarily think that's an insult. I think there's something nicely predictable about that the American people even appreciate.
I mean, in a sense, he's closer to the Rockefeller Republicans than he
right.
is the Reagan conservative, though I think immigration, people underestimate, I think, how much anger, because the polling I don't think always reflects how much anger, or didn't reflect it in years ago, how much anger there was over illegal immigration in this country. People might not voice that concern because they don't want to be called bigots or whatever, but they were very concerned about the border. And I think that was a very big propelling issue for Trumpism that people underestimate more than a lot of the other stuff I think they focus on. So, for instance, I saw a poll today, could be wrong, I'm not a big believer in polls, but the number one issue that people were praising Trump about was his Gaza deal. And the least popular thing he did was tariffs. But what do the paleos really grab onto? They've reversed those things, right? So I think they act in the way that Obama fans used to act. They think they're going to be in control forever.
Right.
And I would say their control is tenuous even now. Like they could lose in the midterms and all of a sudden they're, in big trouble. And it's very possible if the Democrats pull it together, well, gosh, that's something I didn't predict either. I just didn't see them sort of just falling apart. Yeah, who knows? Republicans
That I think
could lose power pretty quick.
It's a really interesting part of this, that the sort of aura of inevitability around the new right seems to have really fallen away with this story. And I think there's in the conservative movement, at least, a real battle that's about to happen. And us in the political journalism business, we're excited about that. David, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Let's do this again soon.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks.